what's up? Sinisa, Super Batistrada here, and I just want to give a huge special shout out to the relay. Thank you so much for all of the continuous support, and thank you for all of the support during and after and before every single fight.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Ahead of what is to be next month's unification match in the light flyweight division between reigning champions Kim Clavel of Canada and Jessica Plata of Mexico, one is left to wonder, how might this affect the current ranked standings of the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, it being that the winner of the fight, irrespective of who the winner is, will have a very credible argument to be integrated into its ranks.
Both women have had a very successful year in the sport this year.
Both women have unseated long-reigning champions in the process of becoming champions themselves. Kim Clavel unseated long-reigning WBC champion of Mexico, Yesenia Gomez. Jessica Plata unseated long-reigning WBA champion of Argentina. See herself becoming a champion.
Jessica Tutibab.
One of the most formidable fighters Argentina has produced in the sport. One of the most formidable fighters in the light flyweight division. Jessica Plata pried away the black and gold belt from Jessica earlier this year.
By year's end, the winner of the fight will have unseated two active reigning champions in the light flyweight division. Two very formidable ones.
Two in just one calendar year. In the current Ring IQ pound-for-pound list's ranked standings, the fighter in the most danger of being bumped off, the fighter at the very bottom of the list, Franchon Cruz of the United States, the current reigning super middleweight division's undisputed champion. To date, she's only actually ever beaten one world champion, one active reigning world champion, and taken a belt from them. That was earlier this year on the undercard of Taylor versus Serrano when she locked horns with Aline Cederuz.
And it was a very entertaining fight, by the way. A very entertaining fight to watch. Both Franchon and Aline approached that fight with each other as unified champions. But Franchon, going into that fight, she hadn't actually beaten a world champion to become a world champion. The two alphabet titles she won were vacant.
Aline Cederuz was the first active reigning world champion that Franchon Cruz took a belts from, I should say, since Aline approached that fight with two alphabet titles of her own, thus
making it an undisputed super middleweight title fight. Franchon won in good fashion.
The prediction stuck, and Franchon won in the fashion that I expected her to win. But here at year's end,
would Franchon Cruz have a stronger argument to stay on this list than the winner of Clavel versus Plata?
There's a legitimate question there because Franchon Cruz doesn't have as many professional contests, as many professional bouts as either Jessica Plata or Kim Clavel. She hasn't been as active as they've been the last 12 months or so.
So while she is her division's current reigning undisputed Ring Magazine and lineal champion, her resume actually lacks the depth that you see in Jessica Plata's resume. It lacks the depth that you see in Kim Clavel's resume. They campaign in a deeper, more talent-rich division where it's harder to pick up alphabet titles.
Yeah, it's harder. It's a lot harder to pick up alphabet titles. It's a lot harder to become a champion, let alone a unified champion, because it's a talent-rich division. It's not a barren division like the super middleweight division. And both fighters, they've seen action more times in the last 12 months than Franchon has. Franchon has only fought once this entire year. And it looks like the Aline Cederuz fight will be her only fight of this year, whereas Jessica Plata has already seen action once. Kim Clavel, she's already seen action twice.
By the time this year is over, Kim will have fought 3 times, and Jessica will have fought 2 times. The winner of the fight, whoever it is, will have seen more action this calendar year than Franchon and beaten more active reigning world champions and taken belts from them.
They'll have beaten more champions this year alone than Franchon has. They already have more pro experience, more rounds in the bank, more pro bouts.
None of this is a knock on Franchon, you understand. The state of the weight class, the state of the division, is not Franchon Cruz's fault.
And I'm sure that Franchon would have liked to have fought at least more than once this year. I mean, we saw a video of Franchon vying for a Savannah Marshall fight, a Christina Hammer fight. She's trying.
She wants those big fights, but those big fights, they're just not happening. And you can only really rate the fighter for the fights that they have. That while Franchon Cruz is an undisputed champion, it's not as simple as collecting alphabet titles. It's who you have to fight to get them.
Don't forget what a pound-for-pound list is supposed to be. It's supposed to be an evaluation of skill, the trials and tribulations and the professional accolades, the professional accomplishments of the fighter that set them apart from your run-of-the-mill fighter, your run-of-the-mill champion. The more champions you take on, the more champions you beat, the more you set yourself apart. And it just so happens the winner of Clavel versus Plata will have beaten more champions this calendar year alone than Franchon has.
They will have beaten more champions within the last 12 months alone. They'll have been more active within the last 12 months alone.
The scalp of a Yesenia Gomez, for example, is a higher rated scalp than, say, the scalp of Aline Cedar-Ruz, because Yesenia was a champion for a very long time, much longer than Aline Cedar-Ruz. The same applies to the scalp of Jessica Tutibap.
In other words, the champions that Kim and Jessica beat are longer reigning, more decorated champions than the one champion that Franchon beat.
The argument is there and established for the winner of Clavel versus Plata to bump Franchon Cruz off of the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, at least temporarily, because she could always get back on depending on what happens.
Yeah, fighters fall off and get back on the list all the time.
That's what happened with Amanda Serrano earlier this year, per the rules that govern the list. No fighter coming off a loss is allowed to maintain a rank, and she lost the Katie Taylor fight, but rebounded with the Sarah Mahfoud unification match at featherweight, which got her back on the list.
Franchon might get back on the list, but the way it's looking now, at year's end, it's looking like the winner of Kim Clavel versus Jessica Neri Plata is going to bump her off because, at least for the time being, they have a stronger argument.
Men's lightweight news. Bob Arum hopes to televise Haney versus Lomachenko on ESPN and not on ESPN pay-per-view.
Bob Arum knows between a shrinking American audience that just doesn't want to have to pay expensive price points and piracy cutting into the buy rate of a fight, it's just not a good time for the market.
The teams from both boxes have led their promoter to believe Haney versus Lomachenko can be scheduled before Ramadan begins March 22nd. Haney is a devout Muslim, therefore, the 12-round bout between Haney of Henderson, Nevada, and the Ukraine's Lomachenko must take place before the Muslim month for fasting, prayer, and reflection starts, or after it ends April 21st.
Loma wants to fight next. Igis Klimas, Lomachenko's manager, wants to fight next. And Bill Haney wants to do that fight.
Encouraging signs from Top Rank, who's always delivering very good fights, very good cards indeed, without the hefty pay-per-view price tag. I mean, out of all the outfits out there staging pay-per-views, Top Rank schedules them the
They
least.
still manage to put on very good fights.
Not always. Not every show can be a barn burner, but they usually put on some really, really good fights.
My hope is to do as few fights on pay-per-view as possible, because I really believe that putting these fights on pay-per-view is not a wise thing to do. Now, other people might find difficulty in this. It's not a wise thing to do because people aren't buying pay-per-views, and it costs a lot of money to do it. Even if the fighters don't take guarantees, they hate you afterwards because they haven't made any money. I think that's the problem Heyman is running into.
The 90-year-old Bob Arum alluded to Premier Boxing champions Al Heyman having difficulty finalizing an agreement for the unbeaten welterweight champion Arum previously promoted Terrence Crawford to face unbeaten unified 147-pound champion Heyman represents Errol Spence Jr. Crawford and Spence both have publicly acknowledged that they were willing to fight without guarantees.
The disconnect is that a lot of people still seem to think that fight was supposed to go down this year.
Piracy has an adverse effect, surely, on pay-per-view. But I think, at least from what the cable companies and satellite providers tell us, that since the pandemic, people don't want crowds in their house. They don't want to do big parties with 25 or 30 people. Before the pandemic, people used to use these pay-per-view events to entertain. And if they had even 20 people in their house to watch the pay-per-view, they wouldn't think about pirating the signal because they wouldn't want to be embarrassed if it went down. So, they were willing to put up the money for the pay-per-view, particularly with Hispanics. That's the way they entertained, and in many cases, they all pitched in for food and the cost of the pay-per-view.
Modern technological advancements have made it possible for you to watch a box office fight without paying box office prices. So between a dwindling audience,
People not throwing fight parties as much as they used to, and the ability to watch a fight free of charge all on your own.
promotional outfits and platforms, putting on pay-per-views these days is particularly risky.
And you would think that that would result in less pay-per-views ending up in the market. But the fact of the matter is the market is now more oversaturated than it's ever been in the past.
You know why that is? The dwindling audience. You put a pay-per-view on, and it underperforms. You know, it doesn't do what you would have wanted it to do in order to justify what it costed to put on. As a result of that, the network sees those metrics, and they decide that we don't really want to spend a fuck ton of money on boxing matches. And when they don't spend a fuck ton of money on boxing matches,
They see those metrics, they cut the budget.
when the annual budget starts to shrink year after year, you're going to have to turn to pay-per-view to make certain fights happen so that you can get the fighters some money, since the networks cut the budget. That's more or less what's been going on at Fox. Fox, which boxing scribe Marcos Villegas said,
Fox ain't putting up no money for boxing anymore. They don't foot the bill for production costs. All they do is take their cut for PBC shows airing on their platform, but the buck stops there. They're not paying for any of that stuff.
You might have noticed that most of what you see on Fox these days is billed as a pay-per-view. And they bill it as a pay-per-view because they're not getting any money from Fox, but they have to pay the fighters somehow.
So they stick them on pay-per-view, hoping that me and you will foot the bill.
For what are otherwise ordinary fights like Ruiz versus Ortiz, fights that ideally wouldn't be behind a paywall, but they are, since the network doesn't want to pay for
They
them.
don't want to pick up the tab. They don't want to foot the bill. They don't want to spend any more money on boxing.
At least Fox doesn't, which results in more pay-per-views. More fights that end up behind a paywall because a network like Fox, for example, doesn't want to pay an arm and a leg for boxing.
Nobody's staging more pay-per-views these days than the PBC.
And that's why what are otherwise ordinary run-of-the-mill fights that don't belong behind a paywall, like Thurman versus Barrios or Ortiz versus Martin, Ortiz versus Ruiz.
It's a vicious cycle. You would think that instability in the market would result in less pay-per-views, but it's actually resulting in more. Various platforms.
Smaller platforms like Fight TV, FITE-TV, pay-per-view.com. You see this Black Prime app, they're supposed to be doing the Crawford Evanesian fight.
Since the pandemic, people are reluctant to have large numbers of people congregate in their homes. And that's what really killed the business, because you can't think you can charge $70 for a guy who's sitting at home to watch it. That doesn't make any economic sense for anybody. Even if it's $80, it's nothing if you have 20 people. So until we figure out how you present these events, not on the traditional pay-per-view platform, but some other way, we're always gonna fail.
Bob wants to find a way to satisfy the financial demands of the fighters in order to get them in the ring with each other without staging the fight behind a paywall.
Easier said than done, but credit to him for trying. He understands.
For what it's worth, if it were billed as a box office fight, I'd pay for it, but I don't speak for everybody.
Rampant piracy ain't helping that situation.
Finally, Anthony Yarde managed to score a third-round knockout of Stefani Koykov, much to the surprise of no one, really. A closer look.
Everybody was expecting Anthony to make it past this guy because this Stefani Koykov guy, God bless him,
Whilst having a winning record himself, he seldom ever faced a fighter with a winning record, a capable one, clearly not a world-class fighter, a world-class operator, and a far cry from who Anthony will be facing early next year when he's opposite the ring, Unified Ring Magazine light heavyweight champion Artur Beterbiev. Oh, granted that Anthony's shot selection against Stefani Koykov, it's pleasing to the eye. He looks capable, sharp, strong.
saw some good body shots, some good uppercuts, some good left hooks, nice punches, really nice eye-catching shots.
But you know, the shots that are available to you in a Stefani Koykov fight are not necessarily available to you in a Artur Beterbiev fight. Stefani Koykov cannot offer up the resistance. Moreover, the element of danger that you face when you're opposite the ring, Artur Beterbiev. He's not the puncher, not the boxer that Artur Beterbiev is. So it's easier to look good against a Koykov than a Beterbiev. I think that goes without saying.
You can take chances with a Stefani Koykov that you can't take with an Artur Beterbiev.
The last thing you want to do is get into an exchange, get into a gunfight with Artur Beterbiev. And for what it's worth, I actually think Anthony has world-class power. I think he packs a big punch, big enough that if he can land, and land hard, he can probably hurt Artur.
Yeah, I think Anthony's got power. I think he's got power, but so did Alexander Vozdik. So did Joe Smith Jr.
Those were more proven fighters, proven at world level, champions, the both of them. Those guys were more proven than Anthony Yarde is here today. At world level, all Anthony Yarde's really ever done get himself knocked out by
Crusher.
Sergey Kovalev, then reigning WBO champion in Chelyabinsk, Russia.
So even if Anthony does pack a decent-sized punch, he ain't got the stars and he ain't got the stripes. He ain't got the experience for a fight like this. That's just how I feel.
I know that boxing has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Teofimo Lopez, he actually went in as the underdog in the Lomachenko fight. He won that fight. Coincidentally, George Kambosos went in as the underdog, the significant underdog, in the Lopez fight. We see what happened there. We see what happened in the Joshua versus Ruiz fight, the first one. Andy Ruiz was a massive underdog. Boxing does have a way of surprising you when you least expect it.
I'm really not banking on a surprise. I'm not.
I do think the fight between Artur and Anthony will go a bit longer than the Joe Smith Jr. fight, as Anthony will take a more measured approach than Joe Smith Jr. did in Artur Beterbiev's last fight. I don't think Anthony Yarde's going to rush him and charge him the way that Joe did. Get himself hurt, get himself knocked out. I think that
He's going to use that fucking shell guard.
Yeah.
Get a couple of jabs out there, get the jab going.
Yeah.
Try to walk Artur into a shot, a counter shot.
as Artur Beterbiev advances, doubling up on his jab, a characteristic of an Artur Beterbiev fight. He shoots a very short jab, double jab, sometimes a triple jab to close the gap on a guy.
I figure in all the same ways that Anthony's going to be mindful of Artur's power, that if Anthony has the foresight to be mindful of Artur's power, the same is true in reverse.
Artur comes from a good amateur background. This guy's no mere pressure fighter, not just. He's crafty.
He'll measure his approach against Anthony the same way Anthony measures his approach against him.
Difference being that Artur's been in deep waters before with better and more experienced fighters than Anthony has. Fighters like Alexander Vozdik, Olympian, Marcus Brown, more recently, seasoned veteran and champion, Joe Smith Jr.,
An otherwise durable fighter.
till he felt Artur's power. I don't know that Anthony Yarde has the gas tank for a tense battle.
Tense pressure cooker kind of fight.
I don't know that Anthony has the gas tank for that kind of fight.
Might not.